Hey there guys, this is Obsidian Chill. Got another video for you today. And I'm going to be trying something new with this video in terms of adding some kind of on-screen graphics to go along with my commentary here. To do kind of an elite guide so you can kind of see the arrows here. So kind of bear with me, this is my first attempt at doing this. I'm not much of a video editor, so we'll kind of see how it plays out. So this is Monsters of Metal, first boss, which is Mr. Freeze. So as you can tell by those arrows, essentially you have the ice giant on the right hand side. You want two tanks. One tank to separate the ice giant just so he doesn't charge through the group. And then the second tank is going to take all the shardlings and the ice behemoths. Those cogs that you saw me turn in the beginning, once you get near a cog and turn it, an ice behemoth is going to spawn on you. And then basically you have to turn that cog because in the center, Mr. Freeze is shielded by a dome, which is basically you can't attack him until those basically those fire pedestals are lit all the way around. So there's basically, was there 1, 2, 3, 4, was there 5? 4 or 5? Might have been 5. We'll see how the video plays out, but I'm pretty sure it's 5. So essentially once they're all lit, then he drops the shield and the ice giant can charge through to destroy the actual crystal shards there. So you don't want to just kind of rush through and turn all the cogs at once, because obviously you're going to have the behemoth spawn on each one, and the ice shardlings come out very, very rapid succession when you do that. And the ice shardlings, yes, you want someone picking up that sunblade weapon, which you'll see me later on in the clip pick up. Basically, rule of thumb is to either designate a healer or a DPS. I prefer, honestly, the troll. Through my experience, the troll is much better suited for having the sunblade weapon, just because we have the aggro dump. So as you can see here, there's the arrow. I'm going to pick up the sunblade weapon. And then basically what this weapon allows you to do is basically you one-shot the shardlings, as you can see the damage I do. The other thing you do is it grants you one-hand ability. So if you do flurry, which is basically, tap, hold? Tap, hold? You can basically kill the behemoths as well. They deal, each tick of flurry was dealing like 60 to 120k damage. And you see me get let up here. So don't think of it, the sunblade is only killing the shardlings, because it does one-shot the shardlings, but you can also kill the behemoths as well, which is much faster than any DPS could. So, and basically anytime you die, you have to pick it back up again. Anytime a golem charges and hits you, you have to pick it back up. So that's why it's not ideal for the tank to have the sunblade. It's nice because of the troll, because as you can see here, I'm in amongst this big group of ads. I've got the behemoths all over me, I've got the shardlings. With the troller, either with quantum tunneling or survival, like all these shields, all the control power sets, will like some light on, unfortunately, have aggro dumps. So basically, I can jump in, attack the shardlings, pop my aggro dump, so that I'm not going to get attacked by any behemoths, just in case I'm getting there. Plus, it'd be a shield as well. So that's kind of best practice. So as you can see here, now we've basically charged through and the ice crystals are broken and Mr. Freeze is out. And as you can see the arrows here, there's 2 pedestals that are going to spawn in the center. Those pedestals, as you can see here, Mr. Freeze can no longer summon ice behemoths and no longer summon new ice giants. So basically this stops the ads from spawning, because they're going to spawn, you know, in infinite. The one thing you do have to watch for is those pedestals. Even though you've done it once, they can basically unlight or flame out, and you have to turn them again. So as you can see here, getting hit by enemies, you do have the ability to drop the sunblade weapon. You just have to pick it back up again. But essentially, once you've got those 2 pedestals in the center, which is the most important thing you can do after Mr. Freeze is out, is basically turn those 2 cogs. That eliminates the ads respawning. The shardlings will still respawn, but the ice behemoth and the ice giants won't, which is, you know, very, very helpful for your raid, because Mr. Freeze's main mechanics is that he's going to have, basically it's the same animation as Blizzard. You're going to see it here on the ground. What that's going to do is it's going to ice block you and encase you. This leads to 2 issues. If you're a tank and get encased with an ice block, you drop aggro. So that's obviously concern number 1. As you can see here, I'm getting encased because I'm in the Blizzard field, and you also take damage over time over it. So ideally, you don't want to be standing in that field as a DPS, because you're going to be taking much damage over time in the entire group. So it's very stressful in the healer, so that's why you want to avoid it and keep moving. But the field moves as well. So it's one of those tricky fights where you have to be really mobile. And the issue with that is all these pedestals that you see here, as well as obviously the dome in the beginning, blocks line of sight. So this is another reason why at the beginning you don't want to kind of like rush around the dome and turn all the cogs, because you're going to be obviously got a line of sight of the healers. The healers can't heal you if you're on the other side of the dome, or if you're in the standing in the middle of these pedestals. It's going to block a line of sight heals as well as power. A controller power is not going to be able to hit you. So it's a fight that you need to be communicative with your teammates and make sure that you know positioning wise where you are, just so that a tank or a healer or a controller doesn't like run off. Like say there's a healer trying to chase a tank, you don't know that the other healer is trying to heal the other healer because he's getting hit by shardlings, because the person with the sunblades on the other side of the dome. Then you're taking massive damage, the group doesn't know, and you're dead because you can't obviously get that heal because of line of sight. So it's a fight where you need to be aware of your positioning and to be aware of your teammates' positioning at all times. But essentially, in order of importance, it's basically when before Mr. Freeze even fights, because as you can see here, the after you kill the ads, the fight with Mr. Freeze takes a bit of time because you got to be really mobile. But in order of importance is definitely turn all the cogs. You got to turn those 5 cogs to light those fires to be able to drop his dome, because if you're not, the ads are just going to keep spawning in infinitely. Don't worry about killing all the ads, because once again they're going to respawn. You don't want to get overwhelmed, but it's not to the point where you want to spend 10-15 minutes. Like you could have all the pedestals turned and the ice giant charging the crystals within 30-45 seconds. Just depends on how fast you do it. And then basically the other tank wants to line up the ice giant so that he'll actually make sure that the ice giants are lined up to actually charge through the center to be able to destroy those ice crystals. So basically when he triggers a charge, obviously you want him facing towards the direction of where the ice shards are. And then basically once that drops, it turns into just a single target fight. You can kill the ice giant because you don't want him charging through the group as well, like he is now in this example, because we didn't kill it. So usually the first thing I'd recommend, once Mr. Freeze comes out, get the pedestals in the center, and then kill the ice giant so he doesn't charge, and then basically kill the rest of the ads and Mr. Freeze. With basically the sunblade weapon, like I am now, you're going to have to stay on shardling duty the entire time, because those ads are going to keep respawning throughout the Mr. Freeze encounter. Usually they come around the sides, back on the dome, and then kind of run in. So they don't kind of spawn dead center. Just you're going to have to keep your basically how high I am with my camera angle, just constantly spinning it around, because they're going to spawn and walk in from the outside. So you want to make sure the group doesn't get overwhelmed. The other thing you have to watch for is Mr. Freeze has a few different abilities. Basically, he's got his slam where it's going to be melee range. He's got a pull move, which is basically similar to the Black Lanterns from Blackest Day, if you remember them. Basically, it's more of a tank check. It's not going to really damage you as a player unless it drops aggro from the casement. But the bigger issue is that a tank needs to be able to survive it. So basically, you can block it or kind of dodge it as well if you can get that correct timing down. But it does take off close to 80% of your health. So you do have to be mindful of that as a tank. And in terms of like a DPS fight, it really just turns into single target. There's obviously a bit of AoE mixed into this, but 90% of this fight on Mr. Freeze is going to be single target, because the person with the sunblade weapon is going to be taking care of the shardlings, and the sunblade can also take care of any extra ice behemoths as well. So basically, it comes down to a focus fire single target fight on Mr. Freeze. It's slightly an issue because you got to keep moving because you don't want to line in those blizzard fields, like you constantly see me getting encased, which leads to orbital damage being a risk, and because you can't really face tank Mr. Freeze. That's why the tank here, TRG, is constantly kiting, because Mr. Freeze is not very face tankable because of his melee upfront damage. So as you can see here, Ice Giant is going to die now. He should have died in the beginning. And basically at that point, then you have 0 ads. You just have the shardlings that you're basically the controller or whichever player has that sunblade weapon is going to have to constantly lunge while putting up debuffs in between. And then basically boils down to a single target Mr. Freeze fight. So in terms of difficulty, it's a very straightforward fight. It's very simple. It's just that it can be a little bit overwhelming in terms of the amount of ads, and if your sunblade user isn't on top of lunging and killing the shardlings, because the shardlings do a lot of damage, especially will target other players, so they have to be killed very quickly. Usually I either lunge it or do a one-handed flurry combo just to kind of clear off multiple ones. But that's essentially the first fight here. If you have any questions, each section will be timestamped in the comment section to skip to the first boss, second boss, and third boss. So hopefully this has been a little bit more interactive. I know it's kind of getting there. It's not a full-on guide, quotation marks, in terms of the quality I would normally like, but it's more kind of highlighting some, or beginning to highlight some things that'll actually help you going forward. So let's kind of jump to the second boss here. Okay, so this brings us to the second fight, which is going to be Poison Ivy. Now, essentially, this one is another really straightforward fight. There are some mechanics tied to it that basically you need to follow. Basically, think of Poison Ivy like Colin Wrath in terms of, basically, it's a mix of Colin Wrath and Tala from Gotham City Zoo. Colin Wrath, basically, Poison Ivy's got buff defense. You're not going to be doing a lot of damage up front. It's going to be very slow damage in terms of that aspect if you don't follow it. And basically what the arrow kind of meant to show on the screen, similar to Tala in Gotham City Zoo, Poison Ivy has a mind control mechanic. What the mind control mechanic is if you're close enough to Poison Ivy or can kind of tell the animation, she does a blow kiss animation. And basically what that does is it's going to mind control you. Now, if you do a dodge roll at that exact moment when she's doing her blow kiss animation, you will avoid the mind control. In regards to that, I believe that's the only way to avoid it. Essentially, you're going to have multiple players get mind controlled. That's when you have to turn those cogs. Basically, there's two different cogs. The first one you just saw was the debuff one. This one on this clip here, this is the actual mind control break one. So as you can see, I hit power 1, I go up to the player, kind of target them, hit player 1, break out. Then I go off to the side and hit power 3, as you saw there, power 4. And basically that breaks you out. If I was near the group and hit power 4, I would do burst damage to everyone around me, which is not ideal, especially in Elite with the death counter. So that one, you basically, there's a few different ways you can kind of play and structure this. As you can see here, I'll just kind of mention it here. Basically, that animation where you get pushed back, Poison Ivy walks to the center and then does a one-shot AoE. So it's a one-shot skull. Everyone has to block. If you were in a spore or you are in the other cog, you will not die. You will get knocked out of it, which is why I had to go back into it. So you don't have to worry about that. But every other player has to block that skull. That's going to do its percentage-based damage. So as you just saw there, Juvenile died. This is because when the spores spawn, they do a massive 20 to 30k dot tick on the player. So basically this tank, it's another 2-tank fight. I've seen some groups do it with solo tanking, but ideally you want to have 2 tanks just to be kind of stress free. The first tank is going to always be on Poison Ivy, and because the other issue is that tanks can get mind controlled. Anyone can get mind controlled if you don't dodge it. So obviously if you have a solo tank and you get mind controlled, then it's just going to turn into a big cluster mess. So if you get the one tank, basically takes all the spores in the back and kites, and then the other tank just stays on Poison Ivy. Poison Ivy doesn't do any damage. She's not going to kill you as a tank, but the spores will. Going back to what I was saying with a couple different ways to kind of structure your group here. You can stay in the spores as long as you want. The only thing that happens is basically when Poison Ivy does her kind of burst damage knockback and goes to the center, the one-shot skull will knock you out of it, and you just have to go back into it. So I'm spamming spore power number 3, and as you can see, that's doing AoE damage to every spore in range. You can also have the group switch and kill the spores as well. So this is basically your choices. You have one, you can have a player in the healing debuff spore, and basically damage all the sporeling adds for you, while the rest of the group focuses on Poison Ivy. Or once the sporelings come out, you can have someone in the spore as well, and then all the players switch and DPS the spores. It's completely dependent on your group, because if the tank can survive kiting it for a while, that's fine. Basically, the main point is you don't want to get overrun with sporelings. So if you find your group kind of piling up, then that's fine. When sporelings come out, DPS the sporelings down, then go back to Poison Ivy, and they kind of rinse and repeat, because the sporelings will keep spawning. At a point, they do stop. But they do come out in groups of 4 or 5, and then there'll be a group of 2 or 3, and obviously a 3 the tank can take. But the main point is that you want to have someone always in this spore, the healing spore. because power number 1, if you target Poison Ivy, puts a debuff on her, even though it doesn't really show in the animation. But if you were a DPS, when I hit power 1 on Poison Ivy, you hit back for full value of your damage. So you go from hitting for 800s or thousands back to hitting 15, 20Ks on your pursers, which obviously helps speed up the fight because Poison Ivy's got that buff damage, buff defense, just like Column Wrath. So it's very important that you have someone always in this spore, either doing number 3 on the sporelings, or if the group is killing the spores, that's fine, and then basically just spamming power number 1 on Poison Ivy. You do not want to have the controller in this spore because you cannot regen power. This is why the power costs on these powers are very high, as you can see. So you can't just straight spam them. But if a troller was in here, you've got no power. You've got no power over time. You've got no way to regen power in that spore. So that's why you don't want it to be a controller. Ideally, it's going to be a DPS again, because obviously you're going to have plenty of them. And then basically, the other spore, which is the Cuff'em one, which is what you saw in that clip to break the debuffs. Not break the debuffs, break the mind control. This is where it comes into play again. When someone's mind controlled, usually that cog is up and you can turn it, break the mind control, then hit power number 4, break out, and then keep DPSing. Or you can have someone stay in that spore. It's not really spore, it turns into like a Poison Ivy NPC basically, like a little lad. But you can stay in that form and just and break always people out when they DPS. Its power number 3 also does damage to the spores. It's just a little bit awkward because it's not completely AoE. It's like a projectile, so it's not as good damage wise as compared to the other spore. But you can have someone always in there just in case someone gets mind controlled. Then you don't have to worry about it. Or when someone gets mind controlled, you just turn the cog, go back into it. That's usually how I played it in all my groups. Is someone was always in the healing spore because that's the most important one. Which basically you just delegate a DPS to it, which is what I was in this group. And then essentially anyone time someone got mind controlled is then you'd go back to and turn the Cuff'em cog and basically break them out and then do that. And that's it for the fight. It turns into rinse and repeat. So Poison Ivy is going to have her one-shot mechanic and go into the center to a skull. You block the skull, she goes back to normal. The sporelings spawn, they stop spawning. Basically you're just spamming number 1. So the DPS do full value. That Poison Ivy you just saw here, go into the center. She does her skull. It's gonna knock me out of the spore, and then I just have to do DPS and wait until it becomes back up to be able to use. So then, as you see, I just popped it, go back into it, and just spam number 1. I think I got knocked out of it there, but yeah, essentially it comes down to not so much of a tank check, but it comes down to the tank's comfortability having those spores, because obviously if you're a rage tank, that's going to eat through all your shields, it's going to eat through your healing, especially if you have spores on you when Poison Ivy does her knockback skull. Basically that's going to be a little bit more damage for you to take as well, because as soon as because that skull is scripted and you can't shield through it, it ignores shields. So once again, if it's scripted to take like 80% of your health down, it's going to do that, which is if you have a bunch of spores on you hitting for 30k ticks, obviously that's going to be an issue, so you don't want that. The other thing as well, it doesn't come into play in the beginning, but near the end, as you can see here, these poison gas fields are spawning. They're like a 5-6k tick. It's more so, once again, going back to when Poison Ivy does her skull in the center, it puts everyone at low health. So then if you're taking damage, or you took damage enough that the spore damage can kill you from the poison gas, that's an issue as well. But as you can see here, basically with me spamming power number 1, her health is kind of chunking off. It makes it into a much quicker fight. If you didn't have someone spamming that debuff, because as far as I can tell, it doesn't last like, a typical debuff would last 12 seconds on Poison Ivy. It only lasts a few seconds. From what I was gathering from the DPS, if I waited and didn't hit it, they saw that their damage was debuffed again, or decreased. And then if I was hitting power number 1, they kind of kept doing it. So that's why I think the debuff only lasts a few seconds. I could be wrong on that, but it's certainly an ability you have to keep spamming. You're not going to do much damage yourself, but it was making a large damage for the DPS Versal and mid-wave in this fight. They could readily tell that the damage they were doing was increased because of you using that debuff. So it makes it it turns it into from like a almost 20-minute fight into like a 10-minute fight basically if you didn't have someone in this spore. So it's not that obviously, since you can dodge the mind control, you can kind of get better at that in terms of your group, so ignoring it. So then you don't even have to worry about the other spore form. Or if it's got an issue and someone's always getting mind controlled, you can have someone keep someone in that form. Or you can just have someone form change when someone gets mind controlled, run off to the side like I showed you in that clip, and then break out and then go back to DPSing. That's essentially there. But ideally you want to have a DPS and a healer in these forms, just because a second healer isn't always required. As moments there are, but you're not always required. Where on the DPS obviously you don't necessarily need. It's just some AoE damage on sporelings, they stop spawning, and then it's just single target damage. So you can afford to lose that with the to maintain that debuff. So the fight's kind of winding down here. As you can see, it's really straightforward mechanics. It's not a difficult fight. It's a difficult fight if you're not following mechanics, or if someone's going to form change and then break out right beside the group. Think of it like the breakout from Darkside War Factory. If you broke out, then all of a sudden, boom, you're going to kill the person beside you. It's just communication. If you need to form change out, obviously let the person know, or just move away from them. That's all it is. And as you can see here, Poison Ivy's getting down here. But yeah, in terms of difficulty, this raid is much easier than compared to False Idols Elite. This one just is really mechanic heavy, but not really difficult. It's just a lot of mechanics going on. And we'll have Poison Ivy down here. Okay, so we'll pick it up again at the final boss. Okay, so final boss, jumping right into it. The main point of this fight revolves around these alloy canisters, which you have to bring to the front. As you can see where they are pointing to the cog where Superman and Batman are. The only issue is you can't make it by yourself. As you saw there, basically as you start walking slower and slower, the dot is going to progressively tick higher, and then basically you're at a point where you need to transfer that alloy canister to someone else. You need someone to walk beside you to be in range of you to be able to transfer it. When you transfer it, you also take damage back yourself. So the longer it lasts, you walking or traveling with the alloy canister, the more damage you're basically going to transfer back to the person and yourself. So obviously you don't want to kill yourself with a dot. So usually you walk like, I don't know, the way I did it was as soon as I start to walk slower, like the moment I start to walk slower is when I transfer it. Because you can still make up some good distance. Just rule of thumb is as soon as you start to walk a little bit slower, transfer that to the next person and then continue on. You do want to make sure that you transfer it to someone else, or someone else is there to help you, because if you can't transfer it to the same person twice, and what I mean by that is, say I started the chain, transferred it to someone else, and then tried to take it again in that same time, and then try to transfer it again, that's not going to work. Think of it like a relay race. It's got to be different people each time. Usually it's about 3. Sometimes the other canisters can spawn at different locations, as you'll see in the video clip. And then it takes 4 at that point, 4 players. But the most important point is that you need different players each time, and obviously there needs to be a level of communication on there. The player has to know that they're going to be next. They know who they're going to transfer it to. Someone has to be in range, because you want, obviously it's elite. You don't want to have an easy death to the dot from the alloy canister. So basically in elite, as soon as you put one alloy canister in, it's going to basically open up portals, which the Dark Robins are going to spawn from, and then a sub-boss. There's 2 sub-bosses. They can come in random order. You've got Red Death and you've got Merciless. So I know kind of you've been watching us fight Red Death for the past few minutes here in the background. But Red Death is basically a carbon, well, it's the same from the alert, but not the alert, the solo, but basically a carbon copy of Johnny Quick. So he does his vortex pulling, so you've got to lunge that. He also has these black lightning bolts that spawn periodically. You'll see players get hit by I can't remember if someone got killed by it in this clip or it was my other raid. But they can still hit you for like 30-40k. You'll see in the combat log, Red Death's lightning damage Obsidian Chill for, 39k. So obviously it helps to have your healers rotating shields for that instance, or that's why I have survival clipping a shield. So basically any time I'm clipping mini nuke, I can clip with survival just for a little bit extra severity. Yeah, it's right there why it died to the lightning bolts, and it hit me for 46k. So they are very damaged. The tricky thing is they do have a tell. Basically it spawns this like black kind of area underneath you, but as you can see, Solace of the Seas animation, all the other animation going on around you, getting yanked in, you can't, it's it's there for like a few seconds before the lightning bolt spawns, and then you need to move. So, you know, if you're paying attention to it, yeah, you can move. If not, then you're just going to have to hope for like a healer shield. In this case, we had water and celestial, so that's handy. A lot of shields there. Just depends on your build as well. But obviously, if people are dying to those lightning bolts, you need to be aware that, you know, spread out so it doesn't hit multiple people, and to watch for that dark area, and then roll when you see that kind of dark black energy spawn, because you know, like a couple seconds later, that lightning bolt is coming. So obviously, Red Death, as being the Johnny Quick mechanics, he's constantly teleporting and yanking people in. So it's also a very long fight because you don't have the correct orbital damage, because you don't know, you know, when to drop the orbital or he's going to teleport out of it. But besides that, Red Death is certainly the easier of the two side bosses compared to Merciless. Red Death really doesn't have any ways to wipe the group. The Vortex Trap, you know, obviously you can get a lunge on that. Multiple people can lunge. Healers can clip lunges. Same thing, the Troll can do it. Or the DPS if they're running Sparring AI or something like that for some extra position damage. I think I just had Mike DPS in this run. But other than that, Red Death, besides lightning bolts, nothing's really going to kill the group, and you might catch the odd death through a lightning bolt, but it's not going to kill you. It's just basically if you're not prepared for it. So Red Death is pretty straightforward. It's just time consuming. As you can see, this last boss fight alone takes like, I think, 22 minutes. So once you pick up the Allo Canister, when you want to close those portal rifts. Essentially what that does is when you close the rifts, the Dark Robins will stop spawning. And the Dark Robins, they have lower health. The issue with the Dark Robins mainly is that they can do a heartstone on the tank, and basically at that point you need to lunge the Dark Robin. So you basically, let me interrupt here for a second. The circle you see on me now, basically at some point, since I ran that last relay, I'm going to have this black energy on me, and what that does is I can't pick up the next alloy canister because I have this black energy. So someone else has to do it. The circle on me right now, that's the Batman Who Laughs, who basically does a chain stun on you. And basically at that point, you have no choice but to transfer it to someone else. So it's just something you have to call out, and the group has to be mindful for, because that can happen. And I know, you know, what are we, a few minutes into this fight, I haven't even talked about the Batman Who Laughs yet. The Batman, this group setup is going to be 2 tanks. One tank's going to be for the side bosses and all the Dark Robins, and the other tank is going to be for the Batman Who Laughs. The Batman Who Laughs tank just takes the Batman Who Laughs into, like, you know, the top right corner, top left hand corner, just completely away from the group. It's something that you don't have to worry about. It's not that the Batman Who Laughs is annoying in the group. It's just that something you don't have to worry about accounting him for. Just put him off to the side, and then have the group focus on all the ads and the side bosses. So I can see here, it basically follows a pattern. So you put one allo canister in, it opens up 2 portals, and the side boss comes out. You kill the side boss, you close the 2 portals, you put another canister in. Once again, it repeats, spawns 2 portals, side boss comes out, you kill the side boss, close the portals. At that point, once you kill Red Death and Merciless as the side bosses, they don't respawn. At that point, then you're just closing portals, killing the Robins, and putting the canisters in. Now, you do have the choice to not put the canisters in, or close the portals. And basically, at that point, you just have the Dark Robins constantly respawning. It's more a point where obviously you get the feat too. You'll see us get the 3-star feat at the end for killing everything. But you don't have to. You can kind of speed through this. It's more so that, obviously, this is the very beginning of the DLC. We don't have proper gear yet. The tanks aren't leveled, artifacts and stuff like that. So as you progress further and you got to get some gear, you don't necessarily have to close all the portals. It's not necessary. The raid ends when all 6 alloy canisters are delivered. So you don't have to kill the Batman Who Laughs. You can't kill him. So at this point, now since we put another canister and the Merciless comes out, as you can saw there at the top. So the Merciless, as you can see here, prepares a devastating attack. Basically, he does kind of like this flip in the air with his 2-handed sword and basically smashes the ground. This will kill you if you're not blocking, so you have to block. It'll go through shields, it'll ignore that. It does percentage-based damage. So basically he'll do this periodically. I think it's like every 20 seconds or so he does this. And then basically you just have to call it out and make sure that everyone is blocking. And especially it becomes an issue for the tank that's on the Batman Who Laughs, because you can't just, if you see this red text come up, you can't just hold block for like 10 15 seconds, or it's not 10 seconds, but you can't hold it continually, because the Batman Who Laughs, he's just going to counter you, and then obviously you're going to die from the actual skull damage, even though it's not a skull, it's just the red text damage, but essentially a skull attack. So it's more the Batman Who Laughs tank is either using like phase dodge or blocking at the last second or trying to get immunity. But it's pretty much okay for everyone else. The only issue is that Batman Who Laughs tank is getting countered. So that's one thing you have to watch for. And because he's so far away from the group, it's awkward to get the res to get out there. Besides that, the Merciless cannot be face tanked. He's very awkward to face tank. Does a lot of damage with that two-handed. So it's basically, it turns into a kite fight where you're constantly kiting him around. Which decreases orbital damage as well. Plus, he can do doom spin on you as well. So he has Merciless. The only range damage he has is his two-handed throw, which basically can go through. If he targets a player, as you can just saw there, basically just threw it. It can go through a player in terms of damage. I think I've died once to it where I wasn't sure if it was an aggro drop or just kind of went through the tank and hit me from behind. But besides that, the main risk to Merciless, if you're not in melee range, is just his devastating attack, which you just have to block and kind of be continually aware for, because you can't give up, you can't afford to give up easy deaths to something like the alloy canister or this devastating attack. It's just not going to be beneficial to your group, because obviously this is a very long fight. At least the way we did it, because we closed everything. And as you said, since this is just beginning of the DLC, you don't need to necessarily do this, depending on a group setup and how comfortable you are with your tanks and your DPS. But obviously at the beginning, when you're getting used to the raid, you can do it like this. It takes a little bit longer. Obviously you'll get the feat, but it's just the safer approach to be able to kill everything, and then you'll freely be able to run the canisters. So as you can see there as well, with his pushback attack, or no, sorry, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but with his devastating attack, there's a pushback mechanic to it as well. So it makes it a little bit awkward to get that heal up, because obviously everyone's low health, all 8 players. So say if you're Celestial, you have something like Virtuous Light, which is an 8-man burst heal. You have, trying to remember what the water one is, but you wouldn't be running it anyway because it's a weaker heal. Can't remember what it is off the top of my head. But either way, you just want something that's a strong heal, but you're going to be delayed because you're in that pushback animation, so you're not going to be able to get that off. So it's more so you pop a shield when you can, not to survive that, because the devastating attack will go through a shield, but it's basically to survive afterwards when you're at low health, to make sure you're not getting hit by like a Dark Robin or something else, or if this Merciless was out there as well doing his doom spin, so you have time with that shield to be able to recover. But that's essentially it with the Merciless fight. Kill Red Death, kill Merciless, and that turns into just a relay race. Closing portals. You can ignore the portals, like I said, and run the alloy canisters in. But that's essentially how it comes down to in this fight. Okay, so I'll basically leave it here, then have the rest of the video play out just with game sound without bother putting music or anything over it. Because it basically... everything's the exact same. This is a very repetitive raid in terms of mechanics, a very repetitive boss fight. You're doing the exact same thing, killing the Dark Robins, closing the portals, killing the side bosses, running the alloys, running 2 or 3 players, wherever the alloy canister spawns. You're doing the exact same thing, and killing, some ice chiller ads that randomly spawn. So, as I said before, you're going to have to do this eventually and kill everything just to get the feed, but... it's just something that's a little bit easier at the beginning of the DLC, just to kill everything, because you don't have to worry about it, or if there's deaths on tanks and such, or you just kind of skip ahead, put all the alloys in. After the side bosses are done, you just run the 4 alloys back to back to back, and then have the Dark Robins just kind of dogpile you. But if you can survive, then great. It turns it into, this fight was like 22 minutes. It'll probably turn it into like a 10-15 minute fight. But it's just that, running after the side bosses are dead, it's just the exact same thing. It's just, put a canister in, portal spawn, close the portals, kill the Dark Robins, run the alloy, or you just ignore the Dark Robins. So it just this is what the fight is here. Very simple mechanics in terms of learning them, but you're punished severely for screwing them up, similar to like Paradox Wave. Not that this raid is even close to its difficulty Paradox Wave, but it's the same concept where very simple outline mechanics are right in front of your face, but if you don't follow them correctly, then you're going to have a bad time. And that's basically the theme of this episode. But take care, guys. Thanks for watching. Hopefully this guide can help. If you have any more comments or questions about this raid in general, in Elite, just put them in the comment section below, and we'll answer them here. Take care, guys. Thanks for watching, as always.